This is good old boy Mike from Sips, Suds, and Smokes podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our featured presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 262, Superman Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Now, it's the summer, so we always take some vacation time around here, but we're back after having a few weeks off, and we're doing a movie review of a film celebrating a milestone anniversary, and we're going back 45 years to the original superhero movie, Superman, from 1978. But before we get to our movie review, what pop culture have you been able to take in since we last spoke, Derek?
Hey, Chris. Well, I actually had a chance. Almost everything on my list is very new. So I suspect you have not seen any of this stuff. And
that would probably be a good assumption to make.
Yeah. And I also have a book review. Again, a book that came out in the last couple of years. So nice. I'll try and be quick because I know we're probably going to want to talk a lot about the Superman, the movie. So we went out to the theater. On our last show, I mentioned we went to the theater and we watched the new Indiana Jones movie. Since then, we went back to the theater and we had a chance to watch Mission Impossible 7, Dead Reckoning, Part 1. It was
7
great.
Of them so far, eh?
Yes,
wow.
Yes. So following the Harry Potter model of taking 7 movies and turning them into 8, that's basically what they've done here. They've got this Mission Impossible 7, but it's 2 parts. So instead of saying Part 7 and Part 8, you have Part 7, Part 1, and Part 7, Part 2, which is dumb, but whatever. It is what it is. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Tom Cruise, I've said before, he knows how to make a movie. He's at his point in his career where he knows what he wants, he knows what works, and he works with people that have his similar vision. And it was everything you expect from a Mission Impossible movie. I don't think it was quite as strong as the last one, but I think the last one was a real culmination of the 2 or 3 that came before it. This one was still quite good. It was a complete movie in and of itself. It left a lot open, so you know where the Part 2 of the Dead Reckoning story is going, but it was very complete in and of itself. So it's not like with the Avengers where you go to see the first one and Thanos has a snap, and at the end half the people, sorry, spoiler if you haven't seen it by now, it's been out a long time, and half the people die and people walked out of the theater going, what the hell happens next? Like this had a very satisfying conclusion, even though it was 2.5 hours long. And I am looking forward to seeing the second one when it eventually comes out. I believe it's been the production of the movie has been postponed due to the strike. But it was really good. And the money reflects that from the theater. Obviously, it made good money. Now, this past weekend, we had 2 other big ones come out with Barbie and Oppenheimer. I haven't seen either of those yet, but I'll probably have seen one or both of them by the time we do our next show. But for now, Mission Impossible. Now, Chris, have you been out to see anything new in the theater? Have you seen the new Mission Impossible yet? Is that on your radar?
That's probably the dumbest question you've asked in a long time.
All right. Just want to make sure that people get what they're paying for here.
What do you think?
Yeah,
no.
Okay. All right. So that was my new one. And then I watched a whole bunch of stuff on streaming. I only sort of hit I wanted to say the highlights, but some of these weren't really highlight. Mm-hmm. So I watched a movie that came out a couple of years ago. Came up as a recommended for me. It's called 3,000 Years of Longing, and it stars Idris Elba and oh my God, I'm blanking on her name. It'll come to me. And wow, it's really bothering me that I can't think of her name. Holy crap. But it's basically like a stage play. It's 2 characters.
Idris Elba sounds like a girl's name. Is that?
No. It's oh my God, this is really, normally I write these things down, but I'm like, oh no, I don't have to write this down. It's okay. Anyway, the premise is the woman finds a genie in a bottle in like the first 10 minutes of the movie, and the genie's trying to convince her, use your 3 wishes so that I can be freed.
Are you sure you didn't go see Aladdin?
No.
Okay.
It's a drama, and and he's telling the story, like she's asking probing questions about how he was imprisoned in the bottle and why she should use her wishes, and he's telling his story, and it's done very, very well. It's very clever, very creative. The special effects are quite good, but again, it watches very much like a stage play, despite the fact that when he has his flashbacks, it's full of like magic and special effects. But no, it was quite good. I really enjoyed it. So if that one pops up on your recommended, hey, you may like, give it a chance. It was quite good. But then another one that popped up that said you may like that we did watch was Cocaine Bear.
Oh, jeez.
It's everything you expect. Drug dealers, they're illegally transporting drugs at the beginning of the movie while the credits are rolling, and the plane has technical trouble, so they start throwing all the drugs out the window with parachutes, and they're like, well, we know where this is, we'll come back and get it. And of course, this bear accidentally starts getting into the cocaine and develops a habit for coke. So when the guys show up in the woods to try and collect the cocaine, guess what happens? Cocaine Bear starts ravaging them. And it's as exciting as I make it sound. It is dumb, but it is funny, but it is interesting, and you can't look away. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, way more than I expected to. I had super low expectations, but considering I didn't have to pay to watch it on the streamer, it was a good way to spend 90 minutes. So yeah, no, that was I was gonna say money well spent, but I didn't have to actually spend any money.
One thing, can I just jump in?
Yes,
was Idris Elba's co-star Tilda Swinton?
Tilda Swinton, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I look it up on my phone, like as if I have any idea.
Thank you very much. Then on Amazon Prime, the streaming series Jack Ryan, which is based on the Tom Clancy novels. Jack Ryan was in Hunt for Red October and Clear and Present Danger. That character, he's had his own streaming show. This is season 4. I believe this is the last season they're going to do. It dropped on Amazon a couple of weeks ago, and then they were doing 1 or 2 episodes a week. So the last episode finally dropped. I had a chance to finish that. It was very strong. If you've been watching this all the way through, you're going to get more of what you've gotten before. You should be very satisfied with this one. It's exactly what you expect. If you've seen any of the previous seasons and you didn't dig them, this is not for you. So it was quite strong. I really enjoyed it. Then I had a chance to read. So let me ask you, Chris. So I have the Audible book on audio through Amazon. Can you say you've read a book if you are actually listening to the book? Like, my instinct is to say I read a good book, but I didn't actually read it. It was read to me through an audio. So I guess what's the nomenclature on that?
You're asking the wrong guy, because I just read books. I mean,
it seems weird to say I listened to a book. I'm going to just say I read a book. I didn't actually read it on the page, but it just sounds weird to say otherwise. So I read a good book this week.
That works.
And with Audible, once a month, they bill your credit card and you get a credit to download a movie. Well, if you don't use those credits after a certain time, they expire. So I got a bunch of credits that are about to expire because I haven't downloaded anything in a while. And so I just went on and downloaded a bunch of books based on some reviews and recommendations. So I downloaded this book, and it's called Hench, like the term henchman, except since the main character is a woman, it's just called Hench. And the author's name is Natalie Zena Walschatz. The book came out in 2020, so it's only a couple years old. It turns out, and I had no idea, that she's from Toronto, which is where I'm from. And maybe that's why it had shown up on one of my lists as a recommended read. But the premise is that she's a hench person, or a hench, for supervillains. And this is a story where it's a world where superheroes and supervillains exist. And how do you think all the superheroes and the supervillains make their day-to-day life work? Like, you think the Justice League mops their own floors? No, they go to a temp agency and they hire henches to come and do that kind of thing. So she works for the other side of it, where she goes to this temp agency to try and work for some of these villains. And early in the book, she's basically like an innocent bystander doing a Joe job at an evil villain's lair, and heroes come in and smash the place up, and she gets injured, and there's like no recompense, no apologies, no anything. And she gets really angry and basically puts her use of data processing and data analysis to the test, and tries to screw over the heroes' lives behind the scenes. Because she doesn't actually have superpowers, but she has all this intimate knowledge of how superhero culture works. And it's really clever. It's really well told. I don't want to give away too much because the book really goes in a couple of directions you may not initially expect, but it was very good. I really enjoyed it. I really liked that the main character was a woman, and most of the other characters in the book are women, because again, I tend to gravitate to books written by dudes, so they always make a guy the main character. So it was a nice change of pace for me, and I didn't feel that hurt the story at all. In fact, I felt that it really helped the story because as a woman, she's really able to fly under the radar and be underestimated by so many of the male protagonists in the book. It was really good. It's called Hench. It's from 2020. So
and a lot of that stuff with superheroes is sort of male dominated anyway.
Yes, and that's a big part of the story as well. There are female superheroes and female supervillains that are in it, but her main nemesis becomes like basically the Superman stand-in character because he's a super douche in this one, and she just does everything she can to make his life miserable and pushes buttons, and it's hilarious. It's done in a very, very clever way. So I really enjoyed it. The book is called Hench. If you've got an Audible account and you got a free credit sitting around, you don't know what to spend it on, try Hench. It was really good. Nice. And then I've had a chance to watch 2 documentaries.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
Oh, do tell.
First documentary is called Wham! And it's about the band Wham! From the 1980s.
Oh, this is interesting.
And it's literally the 3 or 4 years that the band was in existence. That's really all it focuses on is just the band. Because there was a documentary that came out a couple years ago about George Michael after he died, and it was all about him, but it didn't really focus that much on his involvement with Wham. It was sort of like at the beginning, hey, and this is how he got started. He was Wham, and then he went on his own, had this huge solo career. And the George Michael documentary focuses more on his solo career and him coming out and that part of his life. And that documentary on its own was great. So I was really worried this new documentary was going to tread on a lot of that same material, and it did not. It was very much how the 2 guys that formed Wham met as young kids, how they had a lifelong friendship together, how they started the band together, how they wrote the music together, how they made a lot of decisions on how to present the band and how to create their image, and they brought different strengths to the relationship, and it was really, really good. If you enjoy 80s music, 80s pop culture, if you're a fan of Wham, or you just want to see a good documentary about these 2 guys who were such great friends, I would strongly recommend it. I want to say it was on Netflix. Honestly, it was on one of the streamers. I'm pretty sure it was Netflix. So that was the one I watched a couple of weeks back, and then the one that I just watched today, and it's super relevant given what we're doing, it's called Super Powered, the DC Story. And it's all about the history of DC Comics.
Cool.
It's 3 one-hour episodes available on HBO. And it's not a retelling, it's a telling of the history of how did DC Comics begin and how did all their characters get invented and how have their characters gone from being relevant to irrelevant to relevant to irrelevant. How have they changed based on the introduction of Marvel Comics? How has the Marvel Cinematic Universe shaped the DC comic universe in the last 15, 20 years? How has the need for diversity and representation affected their business and their books and their creative teams? No, it was really good. It was it's 3 one-hour episodes. If you're at all into comic books, it's a great watch. So yeah, a lot of really strong reviews for me on the stuff I had this week. What about you, Chris? What have you been up to in the last few weeks?
Well, Derek, for the first time in a long time, my wife and I actually had a week without any kids. So one went to camp and the other went with his grandparents. Derek, any guesses as to what my wife and I did for our first week together in ages without any kids?
Well, I'm probably the correct answer is probably sleep, but I'm guessing knowing you had her sit down and watch episode 3 of season 3 of The Love Boat and season 2 of Different Strokes and season 1 of The Facts of Life, because that just sounds like what Chris would want his wife to do.
The first night together, our first night alone without kids, I made her watch Police Academy.
The first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second night, I made her watch National Lampoon's Vacation.
All right. And the third night, Chris slept on the couch.
Exactly. No, but then, funny enough, we actually watched a few documentaries as well. So, based on your recommendation here on the podcast, the first one we watched was the 3-part documentary series on Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, yes.
Because you had told me to watch that. It was really good. I thought it was great. And then we also watched that same documentary on Wham.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
What'd you think?
Well, I thought it was pretty good. You know, I was never really into Wham all that much. Like back when they first came out, I was like a metalhead. in high school. And I remember one of my friends used to say, Wham stands for We Hate All Metal.
Okay.
Not that I ever believed it, but I mean, I always thought Wham was actually pretty good because they basically created that whole genre of 80s pop. They were really original, but going into this documentary was interesting because I went into it really only remembering them for 2 songs, Wake Me Up Before You Go and Careless Whisper. But they had quite a few hits, like Everything She Wants and I'm Your Man and Freedom and of course, Last Christmas. So it was actually really good. I enjoyed it, believe it or not.
Yeah, no, I like you. The Wham was, they were big when I was growing up, but I would have only been 8 years old in 1983, 1982 when the stuff came out. So it was a little ahead of my music taste. So like I was sort of getting into my own music more in the later 80s. So by then Wham had dissolved and George Michael was a solo artist. Like I can remember the George Michael Faith album. Like that was one of the first albums I remember purchasing. So Wham was just a smidge before my time, but I do really enjoy them. And watching the documentary, there was stuff they talked about, sort of the effect they had on pop culture that was new to me, like things that I just maybe had assumed, but other things where I had clearly no idea. I mean, that's what I love about a documentary. It's usually, if it's done well, it's educational. You learn things about a topic you have some interest in that you never knew before. So no, it's quite good.
So I had a week without kids and I just made my wife watch all this pop culture stuff. But then the kids came back and I became a dad again, so I did this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, I figured since we're going to go back and watch Superman for this week, that I'd do a Superman dad joke for you.
Okay.
All right. So, Derek, why did all the photographs come out dark at Superman's birthday party?
You know what? I think I might have just thought of the punchline. It's pretty funny. I don't know, Chris. Why not?
They forgot to invite the Flash.
That's exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I was like, I don't want to steal your thunder because this one's pretty good.
Hey!
Let me tell you about this Dukes of Hazzard remake I've been imagining.
What are you doing?
Some of this stuff was just too wacky for me.
I am the crotchety old guy who just hates everything new.
They're always having parties.
And then I also watched Three's Company.
This is my lot in life.
Nostalgia is a powerful drug.
It's him and so in a romantic relationship, and they open an ice cream store.
It's a dinklage.
He was always making moonshine.
He went on to do gay porn.
Oh, my.
What the hell?
Okay, so we've spent some time this season on the podcast going back and reviewing movies that are celebrating major milestone anniversaries. And Superman is celebrating 45 years since its initial theatrical release back on December the 15th of 1978. So, Derek, you're a big fan of the MCU and superhero movies in general, really. So you thought it might be worthwhile going back and watching sort of the OG superhero movie, Superman. So why do you want to watch this movie and talk about it here on the show?
Well, mainly for the reasons you just mentioned. The world we live in now is dominated. The theatrical releases are dominated by superhero movies, mostly Marvel. They've done a much better job than DC, but DC has made their stamp as well. They had the Batman movies have always done well. Starting in '89 with Batman, which we've reviewed on this podcast, into the Christopher Nolan movies, and you and Nancy did The Dark Knight. Like DC's had its successes, but Marvel sort of reinvented how everything can work, and they've just dominated that space for the last decade or longer. And I think it's important to remember that the success that Marvel's having didn't happen overnight, and even Iron Man, that was the first one, wouldn't have had an opportunity to do what it did had a lot of these other ones not come before it and set the groundwork. And Superman, the movie, this one that we're talking about, 1978 Superman, it was the first of its kind. And from like I was doing the homework after I watched the movie, I went and I read some more stuff, and then watching this DC documentary, they also talked about this, so the timing was perfect. How they took a big risk on this movie, and there's a very strong likelihood that this movie could have flopped. People did not have the confidence that this would be a hit, and looking at it now, we'll talk about like some things I think held up very well, some things less so, based on what we're seeing today. But everything, they always say, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. Well, this is the giant that everyone else is standing upon the shoulders of. And, there's a real chance that this movie just could have bombed. People would have found it funny and hokey, and that would have been it. Everyone associated this with this movie would have been laughed at, and DC Comics and as a business would have gone under. But lo and behold, it went the other way. Like, they had the tagline, "You'll believe a man can fly," and people did. And I can remember seeing this movie in the theater as a little kid and loving it. And I felt that it would be worth coming back and taking another look at it all these years later. Because honestly, I hadn't sat down to watch it start to finish in probably 10 years. I've seen Superman 2 a couple of times in the last decade, but this one I had not seen in quite some time. So it was a very interesting revisit, and I really enjoyed going back to it.
So it was made on a budget of $55 million, which at the time was the most expensive movie ever made when it came out. And it made $134 million domestically, $300 million worldwide. Now, the majority of that was in 1979, though, the next year, because the movie came out in December
right before
of 78,
Christmas,
right? So it only took in $34 million during the calendar year of 78. But even that was good enough for 9th place at the box office for 78. Mm-hmm. And it took in an additional $93 million the next year. So it became the number one movie at the box office the next year. But if you take a look at, like, so you got Superman, there's the Amityville Horror came out. So let's just take a look at 1979. Okay,
79. Okay.
Yeah, just the next year, because that's when it made most of its money. So Superman was the number one grossing film in 79. Then followed by the Amityville Horror, Rocky II, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and Alien. Rounding out the top 10 was Apocalypse Now, 10, The Jerk, Moonraker, and Meatballs.
Oh, it's a pretty good list, except for Meatballs.
I mean, I don't know. I would say Meatballs was one of the better ones on there, of course. But Kramer versus Kramer won Best Picture in 79. It made over $100 million, but it came out at the end of 79 too. Yeah. Or a year later than this one. So again, its box office was the next year. But anyway, Superman was a hit with audiences. And I saw it in the theater just like you did back when I was 8 years old when it came out. I remember I really enjoyed it then. And having watched it again this week, I still like it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good.
It really held up. Better than I expected it to. But I mean, we talk about this sometimes where, and usually in a problematic way, we talk about how, well, you got to watch it through the lens of the year in which it came out. You can't judge it by today's standards. And I found this was one of those times where I actually didn't have a problem doing that at all. Yes, there were some things, and we'll talk about it, things like the smoking and some of the other things that are very much of its time. But I think it works. It fits in the time it was made, and I in the best possible way. Unlike some other movies where we look back at it and we're like, why was this acceptable back then, when it's clearly not acceptable now? And I don't really feel there was a lot of that negativity associated with this. This movie did a really good job and did so many things so well.
I'm glad to hear you say that, but how do you think it holds up in comparison with sort of this onslaught of superhero movies that are out now?
Well, I think it's trying to do something different. I don't think you can necessarily compare it apples to apples. You can't say, let's compare this 1978 Superman with the recent Superman Man of Steel with Henry Cavill as Superman, even though they're both stories about Superman and they both cover his origin and how he comes out to the world and all the rest of that. They're presented in different ways. Like, this one really focuses on who he is as a person and the values. This is one of the things that I think people often forget about Superman is Superman is who he is largely because of the values that were instilled upon him by his parents, who were good, wholehearted Americans, salt of the earth people who had, these big hearts that took in this baby they found and just taught him how to, be the best possible version of himself. And there's a lot of more recent reimaginings of Superman where it's like, well, what if somebody else had found the Superman baby? What if the government had been the first people on the scenes? What if he had crash landed in Russia? What if he had crash landed, years earlier and slaves had found him? And he, there's been all this reimagining about that part of the story. But in this one in 1978, sticking to the original source material, this is all about hope. And it's about, he talks about, I'm here for truth, justice, and the American way. And I think in the 70s, this was the right message at the right time, where it's this person who despite not being American, is the epitome of the American dream. He's an immigrant. He's from someplace else. You know, he's trying to be the best version of what he believes the people in his homeland should be like. And that's not really what movies today are trying to do. So when you try and make that comparison, it's difficult. It's today's is all about explosions and special effects and look at how great these action sequences are. And this movie has very little action in it. It is a drama. Whereas any of the other more recent superhero movies, I would classify every single one of them as an action film with some dramatic parts or some humor in it. This, to me, is a capital D drama. It just happens to have a guy with superpowers who can fly.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned, like, this movie could have bombed. Because if you think back to 1978, the idea of Superman was basically, you know, just came from some comic books and a kids' TV show in black and white starring George Reeves. Like, that was it. The only real superhero in pop culture at the time was that old campy Batman TV show with Adam West and Burt Ward. It wasn't like today where, you know, a superhero movie is a no-brainer. So this movie could have bombed. Yeah. You're right.
Well, when did The Incredible Hulk come onto TV? It was around this time.
It was around this time. It was around 77, 78. Yeah.
So again, it was a hit TV show, but it wasn't like you were asking people to go to the movie theater and pay money to see this. Like, it was definitely a risk. And at the time, to exactly your point, like, in people's mind, it's Batman. It's Batman. Like, he was a parody of himself. He was a joke. It was like people were very concerned that this movie was going to do to Superman what the TV show did to Batman. And even the people associated with the film were concerned at first about how are you going to treat this material. And I read some stuff where they talked about rewrites of the scripts and the troubles they had with the directors and how everyone sort of wanted it to go in a different direction. And ultimately, you know, where it landed was probably the best possible place. We're going to take it seriously. We're not going to make fun of it. We're not going to wink to the audience about how silly it is for a guy to walk around in blue tights. They just treated it like a real story, a real drama, and they got real actors who, you know, can do. Like, Christopher Reeves is outstanding in this movie. Amazing. Like, he is so good. And like, even I watched this with my wife. She kept turning to me and go, "I forgot how good looking this man is. Oh my God, is he? He's so striking." And the jaw in this, like, and today, believe me, they've done a pretty good job with the Superman casting over the years. Like, Henry Cavill, who has been the most recent Superman, is a beautiful man, but like, part of the thing in today's superhero movies is the actors get like super jacked and pumped up. In the 70s, like, Christopher Reeves is in good shape here, but a guy going into a Marvel movie with a body like this, he'd get laughed off the screen. Like, it's so different. It's so hard to compare today's superhero movie to this one.
I'm glad that you mentioned that you'd seen the sequel recently, because they actually filmed Superman, this movie, and Superman 2 at the same time, simultaneously.
Yeah. I didn't know that until just, like, I don't want to say recently, but maybe in the last 10 years. Like, I only somewhat recently learned that.
Yeah, that's why the opening scene of the movie with the three criminals on trial with Zod and Ursula and Non, like, they already had that plot line in place for the sequel. And I think they just figured they could save time and money, you know, by shooting both films together. But when it came out, with Superman costing $55 million, the costs also started going up for, you know, the sequel they were working on at the same time. So at one point, they actually shut the production down on the sequel. And they said, okay, let's just hold off and let's just see if this Superman is actually a hit before we proceed with the rest of this stuff. And then one thing I wanted to mention to you, you have got me conditioned to stick around now until the end of the credits. You know, and so I did that when I watched this, and at the very end it says coming next year, Superman 2, which was interesting because that did not happen, because this movie came out in 78 and the sequel didn't come out until 81.
Right. But they were able to it was just like James Bond movies do that. James Bond will return in Octopussy.
Right.
You know, it's that same idea where it's a bold statement to tease the audience in that way. I mean, nowadays it's a whole other thing, but in the 70s, that was a huge gamble to put that in there and not look silly, right? You want to call your movie The Adventures of Remo Williams, The Adventures Begin, and then he has no more adventures.
Exactly.
You'll look a little silly, buddy.
So I feel like I have a lot to talk about in this movie. I want to start with the score. So if all that a composer ever did in his or her career was to score this movie, they'd have a lasting legacy. Like, what a career accomplishment. This isn't even one of John Williams' best works.
Oh,
So
I disagree.
this
is my number 3 behind Star Wars and Raiders. This is number 3.
But it's not his number 1. You know.
Well, nothing's ever going to beat Star Wars.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think number 1 for me is Star Wars. Number 2 is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah,
for me,
no question.
And 3 is Superman, and then I would go Jurassic Park and Jaws. And I only put Jaws down at 5 just because of its simplicity. You know, it's so simple.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing. But I mean, the others layer more complexity into the composition, so I got to rank them higher. But this is such a good score.
So, I'm glad you brought this up. So when we were watching this the other day, I was saying to my wife when certain scenes, especially the scene with the helicopter, which is, you know, that's the pinnacle scene of the movie. That scene without the music is nowhere near as good. Like when the music plays, I couldn't help but smile. All the hairs on my arm rose up. Like, and I even said that. I turned to my wife and I said, if it wasn't for the music, like this, the music is like just bringing this scene from an A to an A++. Mm-hmm. And then during the DC Comics documentary that I watched just today, they have some scenes from the movie, and it's that scene. They show a little bit of it. And again, as soon as I heard the movie, hairs on my arm stood up, and I started getting those tingles, and I'm smiling. I'm like, it's amazing how important the music is to this movie. I think if the music had not been as successful as it was, I don't know if the movie would have been as successful as it was.
So you make a good point. It's important in the helicopter scene. You know where the score is important for me? The opening title sequence.
Yes.
I absolutely love the opening title sequence in this movie. So, and the score is probably the biggest reason why I like it.
Yes.
I love how the titles are these like silver 3D letters swooshing through space, and they kind of like fly out at you with the score going on. I remember when I saw this, you know, in the theater as an 8-year-old kid, this is what stood out to me. This opening sequence. I still think it's good when I watched it. And it seems to me, and you could tell me, that this opening title sequence has become kind of a thing in MCU superhero movies, hasn't it?
Not really. No, I think more and more now they don't want, it's sort of that Star Wars thing. We don't want to put all this jazz up front and have like the names and all that stuff at the beginning. Like most of that now comes at the end of the movie. Even the title, like I'm thinking like Iron Man, for example, the Iron Man title of the movie doesn't appear on the screen until the very end with the credits rolling.
Oh, interesting.
But I did read that the opening credits for this Superman movie cost so much because it was a new technology. It was a higher budget than most other movies had for their entire movie. Mm-hmm. They had that budget for the opening credit sequence, and apparently the money people were freaking out. It was costing so much.
Well, I'm glad they did it. So good.
No, it looks good.
Okay, so let's talk about the cast. So you mentioned Christopher Reeve. I think a lot of people didn't take him all that seriously as an actor because, I mean, he wore tights, he played Superman. I think he's a very talented actor, or he was a very talented actor. It's easy to look at it and say like he got typecast as Superman, and you know, he didn't do a lot of other stuff, but a lot of that was interesting because that didn't really have to do entirely with him being typecast. Mm-hmm. He was a very picky actor. So he was offered the lead role in American Gigolo in 1980, and he turned it down. Body Heat, he turned down. He turned down an offer to star in Romancing the Stone. He was offered the male lead in Pretty Woman. And when he went in to read for the part, they had him read with a casting director instead of Julia Roberts, who was already been cast. And then they offered him the part. And he's like, the fact that I had to go in there and read with the casting director is unprofessional. So he turned it down.
Wow.
And so it's not just that he was typecast as Superman. I think a lot of reason why he didn't do a lot of other movies was sort of his own doing. You know what I mean?
Well, I mentioned in the last few months, I watched the movie Death Trap, which he was in, and he was fantastic in that. And exactly to your point, though, I read some of the behind the scenes, and they were saying part of the reason he took that was because it was such a departure from his role as Superman, and whether or not that audiences were maybe a little bit upset with the like, oh, well, this is what we expect the kind of role that for Superman to take. And it's like, yeah, you're right. He may have just got it in his own way a little bit, but
in this movie, in Superman, he doesn't even get top billing. In fact,
it was
his name during the opening credits doesn't even appear before the title. It goes Marlon Brando, Gene Hackman, and then the title Superman. and then Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
So I thought was interesting. I mean, I know he's an unknown actor at the time, but geez, so.
Well, and I read a whole bunch of stuff about the dollars and cents of it, where Brando got paid literally millions of dollars for what ended up being between 10 and 15 minutes of screen time and something like 10 days of work, whereas Christopher Reeves got paid $250,000 as a package for both part 1 and part 2. Now, I'm sure they sort of took care of him for part 3 and part 4, and he ended up making some money on the back end of it. But, again, it's like we said, the movie could have been a flop. So it makes sense that if they could pay him a smaller amount, and if he was I don't want to say a struggling actor, but an actor who hadn't really established himself as a big Hollywood movie star who could mainstream a movie, then you get what you get. But it was interesting to read that. And then the other travesty was that Margot Kidder I think they said she's billed 8th. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, like that wouldn't happen today. Like there's no way. Like, and that a big part of that is because she's a woman. Like that's,
for sure.
I'm sure there was other,
yeah.
I'm sure there was other reasons, but that was, I'm sure, a big part of it.
And she was unknown at the time too. So,
but still, you talk about Superman, you think, well, it's gonna be Superman and Lois Lane, and maybe Lex Luthor, but it's like, holy cow, like 8th billing, come on, man.
I know. So Christopher Reeve in 1995 was paralyzed from the neck down in an accident when he was thrown from a horse, and he died 10 years after that. And it made me think, like, how sad is life sometime? Yeah. When friggin' Superman can't walk. Like life is just so incredibly strange sometimes. And it's too bad, because it would have been interesting to see him mature as an actor, I think, as he aged, but yeah. But anyway, speaking of aging actors, Marlon Brando. So I thought it was interesting. Christopher Reeve one time was on David Letterman back in like 82. And they were talking about his career, and David asked him about working with Marlon Brando. And Christopher Reeve basically said that Marlon Brando was a sellout. Yeah, I read that too. Yeah, he's like he didn't care when he came onto this set, and like he admitted, like, Brando was a magnificent actor, and like he was, but he just did the role in Superman for the money, phoned in his performance. I know Brando did all of his lines using cue cards. Although it wasn't the first time he did that. He read off cue cards on Last Tango in Paris as well. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he may have sold out, but watching this movie, I thought his performance as Jor-El was actually pretty good. Yeah, like, considering I was reading some of the stuff about casting, and a lot of the reasons that other performers turned down either the role of Superman or the role of Lex Luthor was they were like, I don't want to wear tights. I don't want to do this movie that's a kiddie movie, a comic book movie where no one's taking it seriously. Like, when I watched it, I believe Brando was taking it very seriously. Like, mm-hmm. he wasn't, again, it wasn't the 66 Batman where he was all like, pow and zammy and doing ridiculous things and wink at the camera. Like, it's clear that he was, although Christopher Reeves is saying he was phoning it in, and he was still doing what he was hired to do. It seemed like he was taking the material seriously, even if he hadn't memorized the lines, and did what they needed him to do. The first 20-25 minutes of the movie are take place on Krypton. Superman's not even on it. It's like you're establishing that backstory of this is who his father was. Like this, Brando's the top name in the movie. They're going to put him in the movie right at the beginning. And I think he did exactly what they wanted him to do, what they needed him to do, what they hired him to do. Give the movie immediate credibility by being a serious actor in these opening sequences and take this seriously. Yeah, I think for millennials and people today, younger people, they don't understand Marlon Brando was one of the greatest actors of his generation. Yeah. Like, he was phenomenal. I remember John Belushi used to idolize Brando, and Belushi used to play him in a couple of sketches on the old Saturday Night Live. He played Brando as Don Corleone in a sketch called Godfather Therapy with Elliot Gould. Oh, I think I remember that. Yeah. Belushi had him nailed, like, just perfect impression. And Belushi also played Brando as Jor-El in a sketch called Uberman. I remember. Okay. His floating head appeared just like in Superman to give nice. Dan Aykroyd's Uberman this advice. But Marlon Brando, man, he was something else. You mentioned Margot Kidder. Initially, for me, it seemed that she was a bit of an odd casting choice. I don't know if it's just that she seemed like she was maybe a little bit too old for the part or something. She was 30 when they shot the film. Maybe she just seemed older than that. I don't know. Christopher Reeve was 24. I don't know. But my first impression was, she's too old to pull this off. but I think she did. I thought she as I watched the film, I was like, she was pretty good. What did you think of her?
Yeah, I think her performance was good, but honestly, there's just something about her I've never cared for, and that's just me personally. It's nothing about her ability as a performer. I think that she did a great job, but for me, she just never really did it as a Lois Lane. I did see that on one of the DVDs or one of the Blu-rays, there was some behind-the-scenes stuff where they showed they had cast Stockard Channing, or they were going to cast her, and they had her do some scenes with Christopher Reeves as Superman. And so there's some behind-the-scenes footage that's available where you actually see Stockard Channing and Christopher Reeves performing scenes together.
Oh,
and
interesting.
I don't know how that would have worked. I think that might have been a little bit odd as well, but it seemed to me that that after seeing that and sort of rewatching it with Margot Kidder, I'm like, she did a fine job, but in my mind, like, the role almost seemed interchangeable. Any female actor could have done it. Like, she didn't wow me, like this. I don't see anybody else playing Superman. Christopher Reeves totally wowed me. You believed he was Superman. With her as Lois Lane, I was like, she was fine, but I could see 20 other people coming in and doing that, and I'd be like, they were fine as well. That's just my personal.
Yeah, a couple things there. Stockard Channing, I'm glad didn't get this part because it freed her up in 1978 to do The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. Right. So, one of my favorites. But Margot Kidder, like, at the time, like, she's Canadian too. Like, and she was an unknown Canadian actress when she got this. She did some TV back in the 70s. She did this really good Canadian film called Black Christmas back in 74 with Keir Dullea and John Saxon. John Saxon from Enter the Dragon that we did earlier this year on the podcast. And
I might have seen that movie. It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was really good. And then she did the Amityville Horror the year after this came out, and she was obviously in Superman 2. But other than that, she didn't really have much of a career in Hollywood, I wanted to mention Jackie Cooper, Perry White, the editor of the Daily Planet. And the reason I want to mention him, I don't know if you know this, Derek, but he was one of the original Little Rascals.
I didn't know that until I looked it up later. Yeah. But again, watching it today, that meant nothing to me. But in the moment, I'm sure some people would have recognized. It's like when they do those, like when they've redone Superman and they've had people from this movie in those ones as a little wink, wink. Like, that to me is sort of almost like what this is. Like, oh, do you recognize this guy? Wink, wink. He was big when the Superman comics came out.
But like back in like 78 when this movie came out, the Little Rascals were on TV every day after school. Even though they were from the 30s, so everybody knew Jackie Cooper, right? And the thing about him was he looks the exact same as an adult as he did when he was a kid. His face is identical. And I really liked him in Our King. So Gene Hackman, I want to talk about. You talk about Marlon Brando being one of the greatest actors of his generation. So is Gene Hackman.
He's pretty good.
Something else, and the thing for me is, like, he's such an original actor, such an original leading man, like, so talented. Like, The French Connection, Hoosiers. He won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for The Unforgiven and Best Actor for Mississippi Burning. And he was nominated 3 other times. He was nominated for Bonnie and Clyde, French Connection, and I Never Sang for My Father. Like, so I thought he was great as Lex Luthor, at least in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, no, my only beef is that in the comic books, Lex Luthor is bald. And I read the behind the scenes stuff that Hackman was like, I'll do this movie, but I'm not shaving my head and I'm not wearing a bald cap. And they had him compromise where he said he would do the bald cap for one scene, which he does at the end of the movie. And apparently if you sort of watch it on slow motion, you can totally see it's a bald cap because he was like just difficult about putting it on. That to me was one of the things that as a young kid, I was confused. Like, why is Lex Luthor got hair? And it seems like a small detail, but it really bothered me for a long time. And when I watched it again this week, it sort of just tugged at the back of my, the back of my mind. It's like, I get that you're a big movie star, but like, come on, man, seriously, suck it up. Like, they paid you $1 million. Like, shave your head.
Yeah, there was a scene too in his underground lair there where Ned Beatty there was all these like wigs around. So kind of hinted at the fact that he was bald. And speaking of Ned Beatty, he was really required in this part, I think, because he gave some levity to things.
Yeah.
Lex Luthor is just this evil, evil guy who wants to kill a lot of innocent people. And Otis helps to add a bit of comic relief to that, with his bumbling and stuff. And that, I think, is important there. But speaking of Ned Beatty, perhaps the greatest character actor who's ever lived. I think he was in Back to School. That's a favorite of yours.
Yeah,
Eric.
he was the Dean Martin.
Yeah, and he was in like Hopscotch and The Incredible Shrinking Woman, and
He's
it's
in Deliverance.
Yes, of Deliverance. I mean,
and he was in the Homicide TV show, and he was amazing in that.
And
That was much later in his career.
Right. Speaking of Deliverance, and unfortunately, for all the work he's ever done, he'll probably always be best remembered just for getting by a hillbilly in Deliverance. Like, that's so bad. But I want to mention Mark McClure too. And I only want to mention him because he was also in Back to the Future. Remember, he was Marty McFly's brother, Dave?
Yes.
Who disappeared from the photograph. It's like, it's a small part there. And I also want to bring up some of the elders at the beginning of the film.
Oh, yeah.
So Trevor,
guilty.
Yes. So Trevor Howard was one of them.
Men.
Yes. So Trevor Howard was one. He was in The Third Man in Gandhi. And another one of the elders was actually played by John Hollis, who was Lobot in The Empire Strikes Back. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
The bald guy with the computer wrapped around the back of his head. But anyway, something you mentioned before, I just want to circle back to. You were talking about Superman being American,
Yes.
and I think it's important because I think he's the most American of all superheroes, right?
Well, I mean, yes, definitely.
Like, I mean, he was a quote unquote American character. Like, he seems more American than Batman or Spider-Man or even Captain America, and he was invented by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
Yeah.
Joe Shuster was a Canadian. He was from Toronto. His cousin is Frank Schuster from the comedy duo Wayne and Schuster. Remember those guys?
I do.
Yeah, well, and Frank's daughter, Rosie, went on to New York and worked on Saturday Night Live, too. Well, just some interesting trivia, I guess. But, okay, so the movie is pretty long. It's like 2.5 hours long. But it's because it's almost like two movies in one. Like, there's the origin story and then the Superman story. I'm glad they're both in there. I think it makes sense. I think it makes the movie stronger, don't you think?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying, I think if this had been billed and composed as an action movie, this would be way too long, especially for 1978. But because it's a drama, like I was saying, it's a drama. People were willing to sit through a longer movie. Like you said, Apocalypse Now was one of the other movies in the top 10. That movie's got to be, 3 hours? And then the director's cut is like 4 hours. Like, in the 70s, people were more willing to sit through longer things. They it's not like today where people have this incredibly short attention spans. Like, people understood, if I'm going to a movie, the people putting this movie together are telling me a story. And if that story takes 2 hours or 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 45 minutes, they're going to give it that time. And I don't think it would have been seen as a big deal or a negative in this case. I think it would have done it a disservice to trim out 20 minutes just to get it down to that 2 hour time slot, because I didn't see a lot of things in this movie that I would have trimmed out. We can talk about, there were a couple of scenes that I might have made a little shorter, but not to the tune of 20 minutes.
So you love all these MCU movies, these new ones. Is the idea of the origin story like a thing now? It seems like it is.
Well, it definitely is with Superman, the movie, being the first of its kind. You want to start literally at the beginning. But with so many of these other characters, especially the Marvel characters, so many of them, just broad mainstream audiences didn't know who they were. So you had to do an origin story to explain it. But then you fall into the trap where it comes down to dollars and cents and contracts. You get things like Spider-Man, where, if they don't make a movie every X number of years, the rights revert back to Marvel. So Sony keeps pumping out these Spider-Man movies. So you have a Spider-Man origin movie, and then 10 years later, you get another Spider-Man origin movie. And then 10 years later, you get another Spider-Man. And the same with Superman, right? As they've made more iterations of Superman, they've been a little more selective about how they want to retell this origin story. And I think with a character like Superman now, he is so well known in the mainstream pop culture. The people don't need an origin story. Just tell us the story you want, and maybe, like they did with the Man of Steel, you can tell pieces of the origin in flashback as they're related to what's happening with the main story now. But with a character this big, you can get away without it. Now, in 1978, you didn't have that context. There was a lot of people that maybe, oh yeah, Superman, he's the guy who flies around. But I don't necessarily think people understood or were familiar with the origins of the character. And so I think they needed to put it in there. And like you said, like, it took 20, 30 minutes. Like, it's almost like its own movie. You have the part at Krypton, then you have the part with him in Kansas as a baby and a youngster. And then it's not until like halfway through the movie where Christopher Reeves shows up as Superman. But you need that first half for the second half to work. If you don't understand where he came from and why he's doing what he's doing and how he became the person he is, then the way he acts is just going to seem ridiculous. Like, why is this guy so naive? Is this guy really, as the Boy Scout that he's pretending to be? Well, because you've seen that first hour of his origin story, yeah, he's genuine.
So I like the origin story in this. I feel it's really important. But I also thought the movie really kicks in when Christopher Reeve finally appears.
Yes,
and we get
definitely.
that whole Superman in New York story going on. Like, you agree, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. So at the beginning of the film, Jor-El has the theory that the planet's going to explode, and the elders don't believe him. So he puts his baby son in that spacecraft and sends him to Earth.
Yep.
The journey to Earth is so long, the kid ages like 3 years. So I have a couple questions. Where did he get food, and how did he go to the bathroom in that thing?
Yeah, that is, so the origin of Superman has been modified over time as the story has required. In some cases, in most of the cases of the comic book, they talk about the baby that's put in the ship is in some form of stasis, and that it takes years. And he's not in there for just the 2 or 3 years that they sort of make it out to seem he's in there, that it's like he's in there much longer. But yeah, to your point, they show the child being wide awake. So yeah, how does it eat? How does it go to the bathroom? Who cleans up the poop? Like, I think we're just supposed to believe that a society that's advanced enough to put their kid into a rocket ship and send him away has some sort of way to deal with that. And especially in 1978, people aren't worried about those little details.
So the whole idea that Jor-El sends his only son to Earth to help show people the way and like help them, it just smacks of religious overtones.
Oh, well, the whole Superman story of, it parallels the story of Moses, where it's like they put the child in the basket, they put him in the river, he floats away, and then he gets discovered, and he's raised under, he's raised by people who can give him a different perspective. Like that's
even
right out of the Bible.
Or even Jesus, like sent your only son down to Earth to save people and stuff like that. But I don't recall a lot of outrage or people offended at this movie back when it came out. And I mean, let's face it, a lot of deeply religious people freak the hell out at this kind of stuff, but I don't know. I don't remember seeing any of that. Like he's not portrayed as a god. Like, he doesn't tell people what they should or shouldn't believe in. So,
well, and I think that's why you don't have that outrage that you might expect. Partly because the character at the time of the release of this movie had been a known character for 40 years. If this is the first time anybody had ever seen this, there would be a lot more. I think there would be a lot more criticism about it. But to your point, the fact that he doesn't show up and say, do it, do this because I'm telling you to do this. It's more of Superman is always the beacon of hope. He's the pinnacle of what people should aspire to be. And he leads by example. He tries to be the absolute, in this particular version, he's American. He tries to be what he believes is the best an American can be. You want to, and when he plays Clark Kent, you see those qualities where, he's polite. He treats everybody equally. He's, he does all the things that you would expect, a very good and kind-hearted person to do. And I think a lot of religious groups would see a lot of positivity in that. So why would you rally against this character that is actually, exuding the qualities that you would think that your religion is trying to teach anyway? I would think it'd be the opposite. They'd be like, hey, people in my congregation, go see Superman. This is a great movie about a powerful character who brings hope to everybody. So,
So he lands on Earth, and like you mentioned, it's in Kansas, and he's adopted by this rural, older, childless couple. They raise him. And then when he becomes a teenager, the actor that plays him really looks like Lance Guest from The Last Starfighter.
Yeah.
And I remember you mentioned that when we did our review of The Last Starfighter. It's not. It's his name was Jeff East. He was actually Huck Finn in the 1973 movie Tom Sawyer with Johnny Whitaker and Jodie Foster. That's where he was known before this. But so the one scene I noticed with the Jeff East character, when he's running alongside the train and there's a little girl on the train and she sees him and she says something to her parents. The audio is stripped out of the version of the film that I was watching this week. But, you know, having seen this movie several times over the years, I remember this scene, and I remember the little girl says to her mom, look, there's something like, you know, there's a man outside, you know, and her mom's like, oh, Lois, you've got such an imagination.
Yeah.
Implying that it's Lois Lane, like a little girl, right? But they took that part out. Like, did the version you watched this week, do you remember? I mean, it's minor detail, but did you notice that?
Yeah, so I've learned that there are multiple versions of this movie out there, and the one that is available on streaming right now, I think I watched the same one you watch, but I have them on DVD, and you're absolutely right. In the original DVD version, that line is in there. There's also a few other scenes that were removed and or added. I know there was like a director's cut that was released, and I believe what we're seeing now is the director's cut, whereas the original had a few different things. One of the other scenes that was cut out of this one that I remember from the original was when the ship with Superman as the baby is leaving Krypton and flying through the universe. Mm-hmm. You see it go past the Phantom Zone, the flat pane of glass that looks like where the villains have been imprisoned.
Right.
Sort of reminding the audience, although Krypton just blew up, these three bad guys are still out there because, as you said, they knew that was going to be an integral part of the next movie, and that was removed from the director's cut as well. There's a couple other scenes that were like there was definitely a couple of scenes where there was new dialogue that I didn't remember seeing before, and there were a couple other details where, as scenes passed, I sort of thought to myself, I remember there being a little more here. So, you know, it is what it is. I think on the whole, though, it's still, you know, the things that were changed were relatively minor, so I'm not going to sweat those small details.
So after his adopted father dies, you know, the teenage Clark Kent knows he's got to leave, right? So he leaves and he goes way up north. I'm assuming at that point just to try and find a secluded place that he can throw away that green crystal.
Well, and I joke with my wife. I said, well, I guess he walks from Kansas to Alaska because since Superman's supposed to be American, he's not going to build that Fortress of Solitude in Canada.
That's true.
That's a lot of walking.
And then the other thing I thought was interesting, when he's walking across those polar ice caps, I was reminded of one of your movie pet peeves, Derek, where people don't wear hats. Because he sure could have used one there. Like, he's
impervious to the cold. That's not. But what I thought when I was watching those parts was it reminded me of Elf. I'm like, good luck finding your dad. Thanks, Mr. Narwhal. Because the special effects were so cheesy. That's exactly what it reminded me of. And I said that out loud and my wife just busted gut laughing. It's
something just came to mind. There's a scene when Lois, after it kicks in and Christopher Reeve is now the adult. Lois first meets him and she says, how are you doing? And he says, swell.
Yeah.
And she just stops and pauses and she says something to him she's like, there's very few people left in the world that are comfortable using that word. Mm-hmm. I say swell all the time. I don't know if it's just me. Even at work, people are like,
are you secretly Superman, Chris?
Maybe I am. You never know. Then the scene with the mugger in the alley, I thought was interesting too, because he catches the bullet and he pretends to faint to keep up the illusion, obviously, that he's, a wimp. And by the way, this whole idea of Clark Kent being bumbling and shy, that was all Christopher Reeve. He brought that to that role. Like he wanted to be a real separation between the characters, which is smart because if you don't have that, the only thing that you have the difference is a pair of glasses,
Yeah.
Right. But in the alley, when he catches the bullet and then he throws the bullet away, he gives this little smirk.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the other real contribution that Christopher Reeve made to this character, because he puts these little moments of humor in there. It's not even really humor. It's more like lightheartedness or something. He was the perfect actor for this part, I think.
Yeah, he brings a humanity to a character that's supposed to be an alien who's come to this world. So you believe it. I absolutely believe that he was Superman and Clark Kent in this movie. Sometimes you watch a movie and you're like, nah, the casting was sort of off on this. I cannot imagine anyone else doing a better job. And I don't think any of the performers that have played Superman on TV or the big screen since then have done anywhere near as good a job. It's the fact that he was able to raise that bar so high. Anyone who's come after him, good luck. Like he nailed it on the first try, and anyone who's cast as Superman for the rest of my life, good luck. This is the high bar that you are going to be measured against.
Well, let me give you a little rundown of some of the actors that were considered for this part or offered the part before he got it. Okay. Arnold Schwarzenegger was offered the part. Neil friggin' Diamond apparently lobbied really hard.
I heard he wanted to be Superman. Yeah.
Sylvester Stallone, James Caan, James Brolin, Christopher Walken was considered, believe it or not. Nick Nolte, John Voight, Perry King, and Lyle Wagner. Like, we're all considered for this part before. Derek, do you know why Lyle Wagner couldn't do the part?
No, I don't even know who Lyle Wagner is.
Oh, he was busy starring in He was busy doing another superhero show. Man, I love Wonder Woman. Oh, man.
I had also heard that they either were talking to or were considering Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen. Apparently, Steve McQueen turned it down because he knew he was nowhere near in the shape he would need to be to play this part and had no desire to get in shape to play this part. He's just like, no, got to pass on that one. But yeah, I was like, some of those people you think, maybe. Burt Reynolds apparently was considered and either turned it down or whatever. But they kept coming back to, from what I was reading, they kept saying, I think we need someone who's more of an unknown because we don't want the baggage that comes with a known commodity. Despite the fact that might get bums in seats, people need to believe that this is someone who can fly. And to see Burt Reynolds in the tights flying around, I think people would have just laughed at it. I don't think they would have taken it seriously, despite if the role had been played seriously. So no, I think the casting was just amazing.
There's one scene too where he has to change into the Superman outfit, and back in the comics, he always changed in a phone booth. And he's running down the street, and the phone booth is one of those like half phone booth things, like without any doors, and he just looks at it up and down and runs on, and they totally play that part for humor. And the funny thing is, today, watching it with today's, there's no such thing as phone booths at all anymore. Like, what does Superman do in the new movies, Derek? Does he where does he go to change into his Superman outfit? There's no phone booth.
They don't bother even showing it or talking about it. So
yeah, you mentioned about how a man can fly. Does he look like he's on wires? Yeah, maybe. Does he look like he's against a green screen? Kinda.
Blue screen. It was a blue screen. Right. That's why they had to change the tint of the costume because it was clashing.
Lost.
It was supposed to be more of like a baby blue, but they had to make it more of a turquoise to contrast so it didn't get messed up. Yeah. I'm just mindful of the time because we're probably wrapping up in a minute. I did mention earlier we were talking about the long run time, and I was saying, there's some things I might have trimmed out. The scene where Superman and Lois go flying, to me, is 5 minutes longer than it needs to be. I think that so that's one of the additions they put in with the director's cut is Lois Lane has like a monologue voiceover where she's like, "Oh, can you read my mind?" And apparently that's a song. It was supposed to be a song lyric, and it was supposed to be she was supposed to sing it. And when they did it, they're like, "No, it's not working. Just do it as like a spoken word." That was not in the theatrical release. That's been added. I think that was a bad call. I think it takes away from the movie. I think that whole flying scene is ridiculous. The fact that he's not literally carrying her, he's just sort of holding her arm and like what she's supposed to have the flying power just because they're touching. Like that, to me, that was one of the things that has always bothered me about that part of the movie. It just seemed so dumb. I can believe a man can fly. I can't believe that woman can fly in that circumstance. It always just takes me right out of the moment. And when it was on this last time, so my wife said, "Oh, they're doing that stupid flying scene. I'm going to the bathroom." I'm like, "Yeah, good call." She comes back. She's like, "They're still flying?" I'm like, "Yeah, my turn." I went to the bathroom and came back. They were still flying. I was like, "Oh my God, this, you got to trim this 5 minutes out of the movie. It is dumb and it doesn't really add anything. You can have them do this fly around for 30 or 40 seconds and you'll accomplish the exact same thing. It is stupid. That's my biggest pet peeve of this movie. Just cut it right out.
Well, you got to admit though, that's a pretty impressive first date. I mean, I don't care if you show up to your first date with a girl and you proceed to fly her around Manhattan on a starry night and you skirt above the clouds before you take her back. You're totally.
Well, and even if he doesn't, he's already used his X-ray vision. He knows what's under that dress.
How inappropriate was that? Speaking of inappropriate, there's a scene when he flies down and he gets this little girl's cat out of the tree and he hands her the cat and then she goes into the house and you hear her say, Mommy, my cat was in a tree and a man flew down and got him for me. And the girl's mom says, I told you never to lie. And you hear the little girl getting slapped.
Yeah.
I was like, Jesus Christ, what the hell was that all about?
Well, not only that, but the mom clearly slapped her in the face because it was the sound of, it wasn't like, oh, well, I'm going to pull your pants down and spank you. That slap happened so quickly. That was definitely a smack across the face. And that, again, wife and I look at each other when she's like, are we supposed to intone that woman just smacked the daughter in the face? I'm like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, it was a different time. So,
okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the rocket hijacking because Lex Luthor sets up the trap, in the road. He crashes the car and he's got Miss Taskmaster laying on the road wearing that revealing dress. Mm-hmm. The head military guy, do you recognize who it was?
Yeah, J.R. Ewing, Larry Hackman.
Yeah. And so one of the other guys says to him, he's like, Captain, what should we do to help her? And he goes, vigorous chest massage and then mouth to mouth. I'm like, again, just like all this inappropriate stuff from the 70s. Oh my God. Did you recognize one of the military guys back at the headquarters that was watching on the screen?
Yeah, it was Cliff Clavin.
Yes, John Ratzenberger.
I never noticed him before. That might have been added in the director's cut as well. Because I don't remember seeing him in previous versions. But
and then the scene when Lex Luthor gets a hold of some kryptonite somehow and almost drowns Superman in his pool, because it's not really so much a pool, I guess. It's like a flooded underground of the old subway station or whatever. Mm-hmm. But Miss Tessmacher then decides to jump in the pool and save Superman, which allows her white dress to get wet and show off her acting talents,
Yeah, both of them.
Yeah. So then Superman's got to go and try and stop two missiles. Like one's going to the San Andreas Fault, one's going to New Jersey. But he promised to go to the one in New Jersey because Miss Tessmacher wanted that one stopped. Her mother lived there or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, it'd be so hard because, Superman's like, he wants to save people. But it's like, if you're faced with saving California or New Jersey, I'd be like, it's New Jersey. Just let it go,
So this is where my 2023 continuity brain came into work. Okay. So I'm watching it going, so if Metropolis is supposed to be a substitute for New York City, and they talk about things
clearly it was because you saw the Statue of Liberty and
Statue of Liberty, and they talk about street designations that are clearly New York. So let's assume for a minute Metropolis is New York City, and the fortress where Lex Luthor is underground in New York City, because she even says, well, I wanted a Park Avenue, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, yeah, but I didn't want to be 200 feet underground. So they are clearly in New York. And the missile was going to destroy New Jersey. Now, from where those missiles looked like they were probably somewhere in the Rockies, let's say Colorado for argument's sake. Mm-hmm. So the missile needed to go from Colorado to New Jersey. Well, if Superman was coming from New York, wouldn't he be flying towards the missile to stop it and not from behind the missile to have to catch up to it?
True.
Again, a very small, minor nitpick that I never noticed before, but it bugged me a little bit. And I sort of turned to my wife and said that. She's like, will you just shut up and watch the movie? It's a movie about a guy flying. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So anyway, small, minor detail.
Yeah, but we're wrapping things up with the climax of the film, and then we'll get to some trivia. But I want to mention Hoover Dam. Have you ever been to Hoover Dam? You've been to Vegas a ton.
I've flown over the Hoover Dam many times. You can see it from the airplane. And believe me, when I saw it in this movie, I said out loud, I'm like, they wish there was that much water behind the Hoover Dam now.
Yeah, so I've done the same thing. I've never actually been out there, but I've flown over it too when on my way to Vegas. It is one of the single most amazing things I've ever seen in my entire life. Even just flying over. How the hell did they ever build that thing? It's just mind-boggling.
It's a massive feat of engineering.
You love your documentaries. You got to find one on how they built the Hoover Dam. Let me know. Okay. Anyway, just amazing. And in all the scenes, you can tell they're using miniatures and stuff. But it's all cool. So in the final scene, he's too late to save Lois. So he screams. And I mean like a full open mouth, head back scream. And with today's high definition, I could see Superman has fillings in his teeth.
Yeah, I saw that too.
And I was like, these Krypton, they claim to be more advanced to us, but it would appear that they don't have any fluoride on Krypton.
Well, maybe he had those cavities before his powers fully developed, and they had to fix things. Yeah.
So he flies around the world backwards, to make it change the way it's rotating and time goes back. And he goes back to Lois and she's alive again. The look on his face, though, when he sees her alive, Christopher Reeve was not dialing in his role here. He was fantastic. fantastic. He poured everything he had into this part. And it kind of all culminated for me in that scene. Just the look on his face, I was like, dude, man, this guy is invested in this part. Like, it was good. I really enjoyed it.
He didn't just look the part. He was a good actor.
Great. God, he was great.
Yeah, he was really so good in this.
Overall, I thought the movie was great. I'm glad we went back and watched it. Thank you for nominating it. Will you give it a rating out of 10?
Give it a 9 out of 10.
Good for you. I would give it a 9 out of 10 as well. All right.
Yep.
What do you say we now have some
fun with Caveman?
Okay, Derek. So I mentioned how Christopher Reeve is the clear star of this movie, but he did not receive top billing. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quiz you on some other films where the lead actor did not get top billing. Okay.
Oh, okay. That's clever. Okay.
Cool. I'm going to give you the title of the film, and I'm going to give you the lead actor. But you have to name the actor that was billed ahead of them in the credits.
Oh, okay.
And on the movie
poster.
poster.
Okay, go.
It might seem difficult, but it's actually pretty simple.
No, I think I mean, I'm bad at remembering actors' names, as Tilda Swinton will tell you off the top of this show, but yeah. All right,
anyway,
let's do it.
So here we go. Okay, so after the success of Superman, they released Superman 2. Christopher Reeve at this point was a legitimate Hollywood star, right? But once again, he was passed over for top billing in Superman 2 by what actor?
Well, it's one of two guys. It's either Terrence Stamp, who's the main villain, or Gene Hackman again. I'm going to go with Gene Hackman.
Yes, Gene Hackman once again was billed above him. Okay, so another superhero movie came out in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
Batman. Michael Keaton played the title role, but he did not receive top billing. Who did?
Jack Nicholson.
And one of Batman's sequels was 1997's Batman and Robin. George Clooney took over the title role. Just like Michael Keaton, though, he didn't get top billing. Who did?
Probably Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, as Mr. Freeze. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, 1980s Apocalypse Now.
Ooh.
It was a story of an army officer played by Martin Sheen, but he did not get top billing. He lost out top billing to this actor that appeared in just 15 minutes of the film's 2.5-hour runtime.
Yeah, it's got to be Brando.
All right, I'm going to stick with war movies for you here.
Okay.
1986's Platoon.
Yeah, I knew you were going here.
Charlie Sheen was in the lead role, but he was billed third. Can you name one of the two actors that outbilled him? Bonus if you can name them both.
Tom Berenger.
That's one.
Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe. Yes, was the other one. Very good. Okay, so Willow from 1988.
Oh, yeah.
Warwick Davis. He was on a mythical quest in that movie, but he didn't get top billing. Who outbilled him?
Got to be Val Kilmer.
You're killing this category, man. You're killing it. Okay, in 1996, Scream basically single-handedly revived the horror genre.
Yes.
Neve Campbell was in the lead role, but she did not get top billing for the film.
No.
Who did?
I'm pretty sure it was Drew Barrymore.
Yes, even though
she was
died,
only in it for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, she died in the first scene, right? Okay, speaking of horror films, one of the best of all time, I know you haven't seen it, but it's 1978's Halloween, featuring the scream queen, Jamie Lee Curtis. But she didn't get top billing in the film. Do you know who did?
I can't name anybody else who was even in that movie.
Oh, it was Donald Pleasance.
I don't even know who that is.
No, he was from The Great Escape. Remember? Guy was lost his vision. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Melanie Griffith played the working girl in the 1988 film of the same name.
Oh,
but she was outbilled not by one, but by two co-stars. Can you name either one? Bonus
I was worried I had to pick between the two of them. Nope. So it would definitely have been Harrison Ford.
That's one.
And Sigourney Weaver.
Good. Speaking of Sigourney Weaver, when you hear the word alien, who do you think of?
Oh.
Sigourney Weaver, right?
Of course, yeah.
But when that movie came out in 1979, she did not get top billing. Do you know who did?
Was it Scarrett?
Yes, it was Tom Skerritt. Very good. Okay, Goodfellas is the story of Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta.
Yep.
But he was billed second behind this actor.
had to be De Niro.
God, you're doing good. All right.
But honestly, though, I think with Goodfellas, I can remember the cover of the movie, like the poster, and it had, I think it was alphabetical, De Niro, Liotta, and Pesci. I think it was in that order. Now, it might have just been a coincidence as that was alphabetical, but I think that's part of it. Anyway.
Okay. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Stacey Hamilton was the lead character, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, but she did not receive top billing for the film. Do you know who did?
I don't, but I'm going to guess, was it Judge Reinhold? Was it Phoebe Cates? Sean Penn. Oh, that makes so much more sense.
And National Lampoon's Animal House, it's got this big cast, but the main character was Tim Matheson's Otter.
Yeah.
And Tom Hulce's Pinto, too.
Yeah.
But they both lost out on top billing to this actor.
Gotta be Belushi.
You did great. You only missed 2. That was good. Well,
that was good trivia. That was a good. When you started to talk about that, I thought, I should do okay on this.
No, you did really well.
But in all fairness, Chris, this really leans back to my Blockbuster days where you had to constantly look at the posters of the movies and the cover boxes. So a lot of these, as you were talking about them, I could immediately picture the cover box and remember, these names were here and these names were there. So I think if you had asked me questions about some newer movies, it would have been harder just because I don't know what any of these new posters look like. But
even movie posters still a thing. I thought that might be an interesting way to kind of attack the trivia this week. So next time when we come back, we're going to come back probably with a topic. I'm going to be away next week again. Summers are tough. I'm on vacation a lot. I'm here and there, but we'll come back in a couple weeks. We'll do a topic. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, we'll work out what it is and we'll figure that out. So until then, I'm Chris McBrien. That's Derek Myers. And we want to say thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.